In 1970, Eric Clapton was the most famous guitar player in the world. He had just left a band called Cream. He was rich, celebrated, untouchable. Rolling Stone had called him God. His face was on magazine covers across 2 continents. But Eric Clapton had a secret, and he was about to tell it to the worst possible person. His best friend was a man named George Harrison. Yes, that George Harrison, the Beatle. The two had played together, written together, taken drugs together, laughed together for years. And Eric Clapton was in love with George Harrison's wife. Her name was Pattie Boyd. She was a model. She was the muse who had inspired half a dozen songs already. And she was about to inspire one more, perhaps the most desperate love song in the history of rock and roll. This is the story of Layla, a song about a love that had no right to exist. Welcome back to The Song Hunter. I tell you the real stories behind the songs you've heard 1,000 times. Today, Layla, not just the riff, not just the song, the story of 3 people whose lives became a triangle that would last for decades, and the music it left behind. This is the story of Eric Clapton, George Harrison, and the woman who came between them. In 1964, Pattie Boyd was 19 years old. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a face that one photographer described as the kind that makes you forget your name. She was already one of the most photographed models in London, a city that year was inventing the modern fashion industry. That spring, she was hired for a small role in a film. The film was called A Hard Day's Night. It was about a band from Liverpool called the Beatles. Pattie's role was tiny. She played a schoolgirl on a train with 2 lines of dialogue. But on the set, one of the Beatles couldn't stop looking at her. His name was George Harrison. He was 21. He was already, by some measures, the 3rd most famous person in the world. And he asked Pattie Boyd to marry him. She said no. She was already engaged to someone else. George waited. A few weeks later, she broke off her engagement. She started seeing George. Within months, she had moved into his house in London. Within 2 years, on January 21st, 1966, they were married. She was 21. He was 22. He was a Beatle. George Harrison loved Pattie Boyd in a way he could barely articulate. He wrote songs about her. The most famous one is called Something. Listen to it sometime, and remember, every word of it is about her. Something in the way she moves attracts me like no other lover. Frank Sinatra would later call Something the greatest love song ever written. But there was a problem. By the time George Harrison wrote Something, another man had also fallen in love with Pattie Boyd, and that man was George's best friend. Eric Clapton met George Harrison in 1964 when both were just emerging stars. They became friends almost immediately. They were the same age. They were both obsessed with American blues music. They both played guitar in a way that felt to them like a kind of conversation. By 1968, they were inseparable. Clapton played the guitar solo on Harrison's song While My Guitar Gently Weeps, one of the most famous solos in Beatles history. Harrison wrote a song for Cream, Clapton's band, called Badge. Eric was a constant presence at George and Pattie's house. He came for dinner. He came for weekends. He came for weeks. And while he was there, he could not stop looking at Pattie. He fell in love slowly. In her memoir, Pattie wrote about this period years later. She wrote that she could feel Eric watching her. She wrote that George could feel it too. She wrote that nobody said anything because there was nothing to say. Clapton was tortured by it. In interviews decades later, he described it as a kind of madness. He was in love with the wife of his closest friend. He could not have her. He could not stop loving her. He could not even talk about it, because to talk about it was to betray George. So he started taking heroin. By 1970, Eric Clapton, God, the most famous guitar player in the world, was using heroin every day. He withdrew from public life. He stopped playing concerts. He locked himself in his house and waited for something to happen. What happened was a song.